This show is part of One Place, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to our daily roundup. We have a lot to cover today, from shifting immigration policies and international democracy reports to high-stakes energy maneuvers and legal battles over environmental protections. Let's dive in.
A quiet immigration court is reshaping national deportation policy.
Global reports find U.S. democracy is declining at unprecedented speed.
A federal panel approves a 24-karat gold Trump coin.
Trump issues mixed messages following attacks on Iranian gas fields.
Analysis reveals the impact of the president's wartime rhetoric.
Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer denies knowledge of the financier's crimes.
Canada's conservative leader discusses tariffs on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Planned Parenthood settles a discrimination case involving DEI training.
The U.S. considers lifting sanctions on some Iranian oil.
Dozens of states sue over the repeal of climate findings.
Starting with immigration policy, the Board of Immigration Appeals, a relatively obscure administrative court within the Justice Department, is undergoing a massive transformation. By shrinking the board's size by nearly half and filling the remaining 15 seats with his own appointees, President Trump has effectively turned this body into a powerful tool for escalating mass detentions and deportations. An NPR analysis reveals that these judges now back Department of Homeland Security lawyers in 97% of publicly posted cases. This represents a staggering 30 percentage point increase over the historical average, signaling a significant narrowing of due process for immigrants.
This isn't just about individual cases. It's about setting national precedent. The board has recently issued 70 published decisions, a record number that makes it harder for immigrants to secure bond or appeal their cases. Former judges like Andrea Sáenz, who was terminated by the current administration, warn that the board's influence far outweighs its small size because its rulings apply to the entire country. Because these courts sit within the executive branch, rather than the independent judiciary, the administration has direct leverage to reshape the legal landscape, making it increasingly difficult for migrants to find relief from deportation.
Next, looking at democracy. 3 major international reports have concluded that American democracy is deteriorating at an alarming rate. The V-Dem Institute at the University of Gothenburg recently dropped the U.S., ranking from 20th to 51st out of 179 countries, placing it between Slovakia and Greece. Staffan Lindberg, the institute's director, described this as the most rapid decline in U.S. history. The report cites the concentration of executive power, the circumvention of Congress, and persistent attacks on the news media as primary drivers. Meanwhile, Brightline Watch suggests the U.S. system now sits midway between a liberal democracy and a dictatorship.
The White House has dismissed these findings, with spokeswoman Olivia Wales calling the V-Dem analysis a ridiculous claim from a biased organization. She countered by calling President Trump a champion for freedom and the most transparent president in history. However, Freedom House also noted a significant decline in political rights and civil liberties, grouping the U.S. with Bulgaria and Italy in terms of recent democratic erosion. While Trump himself has denied having dictatorial ambitions, the speed at which executive norms are being dismantled has left scholars deeply concerned about the long-term stability of the American democratic framework and its global standing.
Now to a commemorative coin. A federal arts commission has unanimously approved a new 24-karat gold coin featuring President Trump to mark America's 250th birthday this July. The design depicts the president with his fists pressed against a desk, a powerful image that the commission's vice chairman, James McCrary, encouraged the U.S. Mint to make as large as possible, up to 3 inches in diameter. This decision has raised legal eyebrows because federal law generally prohibits living presidents from appearing on U.S. currency. However, the coin is being issued under the Treasury Secretary's specific authority to mint proof gold coins, bypassing the standard restrictions.
The approval comes after Trump replaced the members of the Commission of Fine Arts with his own allies last year. Critics, including Democratic Congressman Richie Torres, have attempted to block such moves through legislation like the Trump Act, which stands for the Restrict Ugly Money Portraits Act. So far, that bill hasn't passed, leaving the path clear for this commemorative release. Historically, Calvin Coolidge was the only other president to appear on a coin during his lifetime. This gold coin serves as a physical manifestation of the administration's efforts to cement the president's image in the nation's symbolic and financial history.
Moving to the Middle East. Tensions in the Middle East have escalated following Israeli strikes on the South Pars gas field, a massive energy resource shared by Iran and Qatar. In response, Tehran struck an energy complex in Qatar, causing a sharp spike in global energy prices. President Trump took to Truth Social to address the situation, claiming the U.S. knew nothing about the specific Israeli attack. This statement directly contradicts reports from Israeli newspapers like Yedioth Aharonoth, which suggest the strike was coordinated in advance with Washington. The discrepancy raises questions about the level of strategic alignment between the U.S. and Israel as the conflict intensifies.
Trump's rhetoric was notably sharp, describing Israel as having violently lashed out due to anger, language typically reserved for Iranian actions. He also issued a stern warning in all caps, stating that no more attacks will be made by Israel on the South Pars field unless Iran attacks Qatar. This suggests the president is trying to assert control over the situation, though it is unclear if this is a formal directive or a public warning to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The uncertainty surrounding these communications highlights the volatile nature of the current wartime diplomacy and the potential for miscalculation between these two close allies.
Continuing with wartime analysis. The BBC's analysis editor, Ross Atkins, has been closely monitoring President Trump's daily communications regarding the ongoing war. Whether through formal press conferences, video statements, or social media posts, the president has maintained a constant stream of commentary. This past week has been particularly intense as military strikes were exchanged and global pressure on oil and gas supplies reached a fever pitch. Atkins notes that the president's messaging often fluctuates between aggressive threats and calls for stability, reflecting a complex strategy aimed at both domestic audiences concerned about energy prices and international actors involved in the conflict.
These mixed messages are more than just rhetoric. They have real-world implications for market stability and diplomatic relations. By keeping his thinking public and frequently updated, Trump is attempting to dominate the narrative of the war. However, the rapid-fire nature of these updates can also create confusion among allies and adversaries alike. As the conflict continues to impact the global economy, the president's ability to balance these competing interests through his public platform remains a central focus of international observers. The sheer volume of his output ensures that his perspective is unavoidable, even as the strategic goals remain somewhat opaque.
Next, the Epstein investigation. Darren Indyke, the longtime personal lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein, testified before the House Oversight Committee this week, claiming he had no knowledge of the financier's extensive crimes. Indyke, who managed Epstein's legal affairs and estate, stated in his prepared remarks that he did not socialize with his client, and that no woman had ever accused him of witnessing or committing abuse. He admitted to believing Epstein's claims of contrition after a 2008 conviction, calling his trust a mistake. Despite these denials, the committee's Republican chairman, James Comer, noted that Indyke was being cooperative during the closed-door interview process.
Victims' attorneys, however, find this claimed ignorance deeply troubling. James Marsh, representing several survivors, argued that Indyke's testimony only highlights how much remains hidden regarding the network of enablers that allowed Epstein's crimes to continue for decades. The investigation has also seen political friction, with Democrats walking out of a briefing with Attorney General Pam Bondi after she allegedly refused to commit to a subpoena. As the committee continues to call high-profile witnesses, the search for the undistorted truth about who knew what remains a contentious and highly polarized effort within the halls of Congress.
Shifting to Canadian politics. Canadian Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre recently appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast as part of a U.S. tour intended to boost his international profile. His primary objective was to argue against the tariffs imposed by President Trump on Canadian goods, such as lumber and aluminum. Poilievre contended that removing these barriers would benefit both nations by lowering the cost of housing and trucks in the U.S., while allowing Canada to provide more energy to help stabilize American oil prices. He framed the move as a way to harness the goodwill of the American people through the world's largest podcasting platform.
During the wide-ranging conversation, the two also discussed fitness, martial arts, and Canada's controversial assisted dying laws. Poilievre expressed concern over expanding these laws to include mental illness, a move the Canadian government has delayed until 2027. Interestingly, when asked if he had spoken directly to Trump about tariffs, Poilievre maintained a diplomatic stance, stating he believes in one prime minister at a time and is currently supporting Prime Minister Mark Carney's negotiation efforts. This trip comes at a critical time, as the free trade agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico is up for a mandatory review this year.
Now to a settlement. Planned Parenthood of Illinois has agreed to a $500,000 settlement with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission following an investigation into its diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. The EEOC found that the organization violated the Civil Rights Act by segregating employees by race into affinity caucuses and subjecting white employees to harassment. According to the agency, staff were required to attend weekly sessions where derogatory statements were made, including claims that white employees could not understand racism in the same way as others. This settlement marks a significant victory for the EEOC's current aggressive stance against certain DEI initiatives.
EEOC Chair Andrea Lucas emphasized that civil rights protections apply to all workers, regardless of race, and called for an end to identity politics in the workplace. Planned Parenthood's current CEO, Adrienne White Faines, noted that these practices occurred under previous leadership, and that the organization has since undergone significant changes. She stated that the agreement allows the chapter to move forward and focus on providing healthcare services. Under the Trump administration, the EEOC has become increasingly focused on challenging DEI programs that it deems discriminatory, signaling a broader shift in how federal labor laws are being enforced across the private sector.
Turning to energy markets. In a surprising policy shift, the U.S. is considering lifting sanctions on some Iranian oil to combat rising global energy prices. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent suggested that a waiver on sales restrictions for roughly 140 million barrels of oil already at sea could provide temporary relief to markets in India, Japan, and Malaysia. This move would also force China, the primary buyer of discounted Iranian oil, to pay market prices. However, the proposal has met with sharp criticism from experts who argue it could inadvertently fund the Iranian regime's war efforts, calling the potential reversal of long-standing policy bananas.
President Trump has been vague about the plan, stating only that the administration will do whatever is necessary to keep prices down. Critics point out that the amount of oil in question is relatively small compared to global demand, meaning any price drop might only last for 10 to 14 days. Furthermore, there are no clear details on how the U.S. would prevent the proceeds from flowing back to Tehran. As energy costs continue to climb due to regional instability, the administration is facing a difficult choice between maintaining strict economic pressure on Iran and providing relief to consumers at the pump.
Finally, a climate lawsuit. A coalition of 23 states and 17 local governments has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over its repeal of the 2009 endangerment finding. This Obama-era scientific ruling established that greenhouse gases are a threat to public health and served as the legal foundation for emissions regulations on cars and power plants. The petitioners, including major cities like New York and Los Angeles, argue that overturning this finding violates the Clean Air Act. New York Attorney General Letitia James stated that the administration is choosing denial over reality, ignoring the tangible ways the climate crisis is already reshaping American life.
The Environmental Protection Agency has dismissed the lawsuit as politically motivated, asserting that the original finding did not grant them the authority to regulate vehicle emissions for climate concerns. President Trump has celebrated the repeal as a victory against what he calls the Green New Scam, continuing his long-standing effort to dismantle environmental protections he views as economically damaging. Former President Barack Obama and other critics warn that this rollback will make the country less safe and healthy. This legal battle represents a fundamental clash over the federal government's responsibility to address global warming and the scientific consensus underlying environmental policy.
That wraps up our briefing for today. Thank you for joining us for this overview of the day's most critical stories. Be sure to follow us for your next daily update.